In the terms of my role, I have a role as Colonel of the Blues and Rolls in the Household Cavalry Regiment as Goldstick.
Camilla thought she had finally won. Anne never agreed. And what just happened inside the palace walls has sent shockwaves through the royal family that nobody saw coming. The woman who never accepted the crown consort. There are things that get said inside royal circles that never make it into official statements. They live in the spaces between formal engagements, in the expressions that flash across a face before composure reasserts itself, in the seating arrangements at private dinners that tell a story no press release would ever confirm, in the carefully chosen silences of a woman who has spent her entire life understanding that, in royal life, how you say nothing can be more powerful than anything you say out loud. Princess Anne has always understood that, better than almost anyone. And for years, the thing she has been saying nothing about most carefully is Camilla. To understand why this moment carries the weight it does, you have to go back. Not just to the coronation of May 2023, not just to the years of Charles and Camilla's relationship playing out painfully in public. You have to go back much further. You have to understand who Anne is, what she stands for, and why her position on Camilla has never been simply a matter of personal feeling. Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise was born in August 1950, the second child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. She grew up inside the institution in a way that none of her brothers did. Not really. Charles was always being prepared for the crown. Andrew and Edward occupied their own particular spaces in the family architecture. But Anne existed in a different relationship with the monarchy altogether. She was not the heir. She was not the spare in the way Andrew was the spare. She was something else, something the royal family does not produce often, and does not always know what to do with when it does. She was a royal who genuinely did not care what people thought of her, not in a reckless sense, not in the way that produces scandals or generates the kind of headlines that damage institutions, but in the deepest and most useful sense. The sense that means you do what you believe is right, regardless of whether it is popular. The sense that means you say what needs to be said in the rooms where it matters, even when saying it is uncomfortable. The sense that means you measure yourself against your own standards and nobody else's. That quality made Anne one of the hardest working members of the royal family across 5 decades of public service. The numbers are extraordinary. Year after year, engagement after engagement, Anne consistently outperforms every other senior royal in terms of official duties carried out. She travels, she works, she shows up. Without the fanfare, without the magazine covers, without the carefully managed image campaigns that other royals invest enormous energy in maintaining, she simply does the work. And that foundation of absolute institutional credibility is precisely what makes her position on Camilla so significant. Because when Anne expresses reservations, those reservations do not come from jealousy. They do not come from personal rivalry or wounded feeling, or the kind of emotional complexity that can cloud judgment. They come from somewhere much harder to dismiss. They come from a woman who has spent her entire life serving the institution with everything she has, and who has a very clear, very specific understanding of what that institution requires to survive. Sources who have observed the dynamic between Anne and Camilla over the years describe something that is not quite hostility. It is more precise than that. More considered. Anne's reservations about Camilla are, in the reading of people who know her well, fundamentally institutional rather than personal. They are about what Camilla represents, about how she arrived at her position, about the circumstances that produced a queen consort from a relationship that caused the monarchy significant damage during the 1980s and 1990s. Those circumstances have never been irrelevant to Anne. The damage done to the institution during the years of Charles and Diana's disintegrating marriage, the years when Camilla's name was at the center of everything, was damage that Anne felt personally. Not because of Diana specifically, though Anne's feelings about Diana were always more complex than the public version of events suggested, but because Anne loves the monarchy in the way that people love something they have devoted their entire existence to. And watching it absorb the kind of damage it absorbed during those years because of choices made by her own brother was not something she simply filed away and forgot. She remembered. She always remembers. And when Charles married Camilla in April 2005, in a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall that was notably absent of the kind of royal grandeur that might have conferred greater legitimacy on the union. Anne was present. She carried out her duties. She was professional. She was composed. But people who were there, people who watched carefully, noted something. Anne's composure at that ceremony had a quality to it, the particular quality of someone performing an institutional obligation while privately maintaining a position that the obligation does not change. Fast forward to the coronation of King Charles III in May 2023. Camilla was crowned Queen Consort in a moment that represented, at least officially, the complete rehabilitation of a woman whose public reputation had spent decades in complicated territory. The imagery was powerful. The symbolism was deliberate. The message the palace wanted the world to receive was clear. Camilla had arrived fully, permanently, without qualification. Anne stood in Westminster Abbey in her military uniform and watched. And the question that sources close to the royal family have been asking in the months since, the question that has been building quietly beneath the surface of the official narrative, is this: what was Anne thinking in that moment? Because the answer to that question, according to people who know her, is not what the official photographs suggest. The official photographs show a family united behind a historic moment. They show the monarchy presenting its most composed and ceremonial face to the world. What they do not show is the conversation that had taken place in the weeks before the coronation. The conversations about Camilla's title, her role, her positioning within the working structure of the new reign. Conversations in which Anne's voice was, according to sources, present and pointed. Not loud. Anne is never loud about these things, but pointed. And in the months following the coronation, as the new reign began to establish its rhythms and its priorities, something started to become visible that the coronation imagery had temporarily obscured. Anne's reservations had not been resolved by the ceremony. They had simply been set aside for the day. They were still there, intact, perhaps more sharply defined than before. And they were about to find expression in a way that nobody inside Buckingham Palace had fully prepared for. Because something was changing in the wider landscape of the royal family. Something that gave Anne's long-held position a new and very specific relevance. Something connected not just to Camilla, but to a dynamic that was reshaping the entire internal architecture of the Windsor family in real time. Catherine was rising. And what that meant for Camilla, for Anne, and for the careful balance of power that Charles had been managing inside his own family, is where this story takes its most significant turn. But before we get there, we need to understand something about Camilla's position that the official version of events has consistently underplayed. Because the cracks in that position did not appear suddenly, they had been forming for a long time. And the story of how they formed tells you everything about why Anne's move, when it came, landed with the force that it did. Camilla's position cracks under the pressure. There is a version of Camilla's story that the palace has worked very hard to establish. It is the version of a woman who endured years of public hostility with quiet dignity, who waited, who never overcorrected or overreached, who allowed time and consistency to do the work that grand gestures could not, who arrived eventually at a position of genuine public acceptance that even her harshest critics had to acknowledge represented one of the most remarkable rehabilitations in modern royal history. That version is not false. Parts of it are genuinely true, but it is not the complete picture. And the parts that are missing from it are precisely the parts that explain what is happening now. To understand where the cracks in Camilla's position came from, you have to understand something about the nature of royal acceptance. Public acceptance and institutional acceptance are not the same thing. They do not always move together, and they do not always arrive at the same destination. A royal can be genuinely popular with the public while simultaneously holding a position inside the institution that is more contested than any opinion poll would suggest. Camilla has always occupied both spaces simultaneously. The public rehabilitation was real. The polling numbers improved. The hostile headlines that defined her public image during the Diana years gradually gave way to coverage that was warmer, more human, more willing to acknowledge the woman rather than simply the controversy she represented. By the time Charles became king in September 2022, a significant portion of the British public had arrived at something approaching acceptance of Camilla as Queen Consort. Inside the institution, the picture was more complicated. Sources who operate within the structures of the royal household describe a Camilla whose position has always rested on a foundation that is narrower than it appears from the outside. Her influence derives primarily from one source: Charles, his trust in her, his reliance on her judgment, his long and absolute commitment to the relationship that defined the most controversial chapter of his personal life. Remove Charles from the equation, or even reduce his centrality within it, Aunt Camilla's institutional position becomes significantly more exposed. That is not a new observation. People close to the monarchy have understood it for years. What is new is the degree to which the conditions that kept that vulnerability contained have been changing. Charles's health has been the most visible of those changing conditions. The announcement in February 2024 that the king had been diagnosed with cancer sent a tremor through the royal family that the official statements carefully managed but could not entirely conceal. The palace was measured in what it disclosed. The language was deliberately reassuring. Treatment was underway. The king remained engaged with his duties in whatever capacity his medical team permitted. But tremors have a way of revealing the structural realities beneath the surface, and the structural reality that Charles's health diagnosis revealed was this: the question of what the monarchy looks like when Charles is not fully at its operational center was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. It was practical. It was a question that required answers from real people in real time. Those answers did not all point in Camilla's direction. This is the detail that sources close to the situation describe with the most care, because it touches on something sensitive. The period of Charles's reduced public engagements due to his treatment was a period in which the working monarchy did not pause. It continued. It had to continue. And the people who carried it forward during that period, the people who stepped into the visible operational space that Charles's reduced presence created, shaped something in the process. They shaped a picture of what the monarchy looks like without him at the center. And Camilla was not the dominant figure in that picture. Catherine was, and Anne was. Two women whose relationship to the institution is rooted in something that Camilla's position has never quite been able to claim with the same force. Birthright in one case, decades of unconditional service in the other. Now here's where the story becomes more pointed. Sources describe a period in early 2025 when conversations were taking place inside royal circles about the distribution of responsibilities within the working family. Not dramatic conversations, not confrontational ones. The kind of quiet institutional conversations that happen when circumstances require adjustment, and adjustment requires someone to decide who does what. In those conversations, according to sources who were close to them, Camilla's role came up. Not in a hostile way, but in the way that roles always come up when an institution is assessing its operational priorities. What does Camilla actually do? What is her function within the working structure of the monarchy beyond her relationship with the king? What does she carry that the institution requires in a way that nobody else can provide? Those are not unfair questions. They are the questions that every working royal's position is ultimately measured against, and the answers in Camilla's case were less robust than her title would suggest. Her public engagements, while consistent, have never matched the volume or the breadth of Anne's. Her institutional relationships, while real, are narrower than Catherine's expanding network of patronages and causes. Her position within the internal family dynamic, always dependent on Charles's unwavering support, was subject to pressures that Charles's health situation had made newly visible. There was also something else, something that sources reference with particular care, because it touches on the internal family dynamic in ways that are difficult to discuss without crossing lines that careful people prefer not to cross. The relationship between Camilla and the Wales household. It has never been warm, not in the way that the official imagery of a unified royal family would suggest. The reasons are layered and complex and rooted in history that goes back to Diana. William grew up carrying things that do not simply dissolve because time passes and official positions shift. Catherine, who married into the family rather than growing up inside it, nevertheless absorbed enough of that history to understand its weight. The coronation presented a united front. Public occasions always do. But behind that united front, the distance between Camilla and the Wales household has remained real, functional when it needs to be. Civil in the ways that royal life requires civility, but not close, not trusting. Not the kind of relationship that produces genuine institutional solidarity when the pressure comes. And pressure in the spring of 2025 was coming. Not dramatically, not in the form of a single explosive incident that could be pointed to and examined. In the form of a gradual, quiet, but unmistakable shift in the internal landscape of the royal family. A shift in which certain figures were moving toward the center of institutional gravity and others were finding themselves, almost imperceptibly, at a greater distance from it. Camilla was moving in the wrong direction. She did not announce it. Nobody announced it. It was the kind of movement that royal institutions specialize in, visible only to those close enough to read the signs, perceptible only to those who understand that in the monarchy, the most significant changes rarely arrive with fanfare. They arrive in the seating arrangements, in the briefing patterns, in which voices are sought and which are noted but not acted upon, and in the position of one woman in particular whose institutional authority had been quietly, deliberately, and very precisely brought to bear on a situation that had been building for longer than most people outside the palace walls realized. Anne had been watching all of this, and Anne, as anyone who has paid attention to her across 5 decades of royal life will tell you, does not watch indefinitely without eventually acting. The question was never whether she would move. The question was when and how, and what it would cost the people standing in the space she moved into. That question was about to be answered. Charles Bowes to Catherine. There are moments in institutional life that look like gestures. They are framed as gestures. They are presented as gestures. The people involved in them are careful to ensure that the official reading of what happened describes something modest, something natural, something that does not require the kind of analysis that would make the people on the losing side of it feel the full weight of what just occurred. But some gestures are not gestures at all. Some gestures are decisions, permanent ones, dressed in the language of informality to make them easier to absorb, but carrying a structural weight that the informal language cannot disguise for long. What Charles did in relation to Catherine in the early months of 2025 was that kind of moment. To understand it fully, you have to understand where Catherine was at that point in time. She had spent the better part of 2024 navigating something that would have broken a less composed person entirely. Her own cancer diagnosis, confirmed publicly in March 2024, had removed her from public duties for months. The period of her absence was one of the most scrutinized in recent royal history. Every non-appearance was analyzed. Every carefully worded update from Kensington Palace was read for subtext. The public, which had developed a genuine and deep affection for Catherine over more than a decade of royal life, responded to her illness with a warmth that surprised even seasoned royal observers in its intensity. And then she came back. Her return to public duties in the second half of 2024 was managed with characteristic precision, gradual, measured, each appearance carefully chosen to signal recovery without overclaiming it. The response was extraordinary. The coverage was almost universally warm. The public relief was palpable in a way that translated directly into something the palace understands very clearly: institutional capital. Catherine returned from her illness with more institutional capital than she had left with, which is a remarkable thing to say about someone who was already one of the most trusted and beloved figures in the modern monarchy. But it is true. And Charles, who watches these things with the attentiveness of a man who has spent his entire life inside the institution and understands its dynamics at a cellular level, saw it clearly. He responded to it. Not immediately, not in a single visible moment that could be pointed to and dated. In the way that Charles responds to most significant things. Gradually, deliberately, through the accumulation of small decisions that individually look like routine, but collectively constitute a statement. The statement Charles began making in the early months of 2025, through briefing patterns and engagement structures and the quiet redistribution of institutional proximity, was this: Catherine is central to the future of this monarchy in a way that supersedes almost every other consideration. Sources close to the palace describe a period in which the operational relationship between the king and the Princess of Wales shifted in ways that went beyond the formal requirements of heir-adjacent protocol. Conversations that previously would have been routed through the Wales household's own channels began to include a more direct line. Decisions about the public-facing priorities of the working monarchy began to reflect Catherine's perspective in ways that were visible to those paying close attention. The briefings changed. That is the detail that sources return to most consistently. the briefings changed. In the internal machinery of the royal family, briefings are everything. Who gets briefed on what, at what level of detail, and with what degree of advance notice, tells you precisely where power sits within the institution at any given moment. The briefings are not public, they are not reported, but they are read by the people who receive them and the people who do not, with absolute clarity about what they mean. Catherine was being briefed differently, more directly, more completely, with a depth of institutional inclusion that signaled something beyond courtesy and beyond the normal protocols that govern the relationship between the sovereign and the heir's household. It signaled trust, the specific kind of trust that Charles does not extend easily or quickly, the kind that is earned over time through demonstrated judgment, through discretion, through the quality of decisions made under pressure. Catherine had demonstrated all of those things, and the period of her illness had, paradoxically, demonstrated them more clearly than any amount of normal royal functioning could have. Because how a person handles a personal crisis of that magnitude, in public, under that degree of scrutiny, with that level of grace, tells an institution everything it needs to know about their character. Charles had been watching, and what he saw had clearly moved something in his assessment of Catherine's role in the monarchy's future. Now, here is where Anne enters this specific chapter of the story, because the shift toward Catherine did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a context, and that context included Anne's own long-running and increasingly pointed reservations about the distribution of influence within the royal family. Reservations that, as we have already established, were fundamentally institutional in their nature, and were focused with quiet precision on Camilla. Sources describe a series of conversations in late 2024 and early 2025 in which Anne's voice was present in the internal discussions about the working structure of the monarchy. Those conversations were not about removing Camilla from her position. That is not how these things work inside royal institutions. They do not remove, they redistribute, they reposition. They quietly shift the gravitational center of the institution in ways that change the landscape without requiring anyone to make a dramatic public statement about what has changed. What Anne argued in the careful and precise language that she uses when she's making her most serious institutional points was essentially this. The monarchy's credibility in the coming years depends on clarity, on the public understanding exactly who carries the institution forward and why, on the alignment between who holds formal positions and who holds genuine public trust, on the avoidance of the kind of confusion that arises when the gap between title and actual institutional weight becomes too visible to ignore. It was an argument that did not mention Camilla by name. It did not need to. And Charles, who heard it in the way that he hears everything Anne says, with the particular attentiveness of a brother who has always known that Anne's judgment, however uncomfortable, is rarely wrong about institutional matters, sat with it. He sat with it alongside his own observations about Catherine's rising institutional capital, alongside his own assessment of what the monarchy needed to project in the years ahead, alongside his own understanding, deepened by his health challenges, that the question of succession and continuity was not an abstract future concern, but a present operational reality. And he made decisions, not announced decisions, not press release decisions, the quiet kind, the briefing kind, the kind that changed the landscape of the institution without requiring anyone to publicly acknowledge that the landscape has changed. Camilla's proximity to those decisions decreased, not dramatically, not in a way that produced a single visible moment of exclusion, in the gradual, almost imperceptible way that proximity decreases inside royal institutions, when the center of gravity shifts and the people closest to the previous center find themselves, through no single dramatic event, simply further from where the decisions are being made. She still holds her title. She is still queen. She still stands beside Charles at official engagements and carries out the public functions that her position requires. But something has changed in the internal architecture around her, and the people who understand how royal institutions actually work, as opposed to how they present themselves publicly, know that internal architectural changes of this kind are rarely reversed. They are built upon, which means that what Charles has done in bowing to Catherine's rising centrality within the institution is not a temporary adjustment. It is not a response to a specific set of circumstances that will resolve and return to the previous configuration. It is a reorientation, and reorientations of this kind, inside institutions as old and as structurally deliberate as the British monarchy, have consequences that extend far beyond the individuals most visibly involved. They reshape the landscape for everyone, including the people who thought their position within it was permanent, including the people who had spent years believing that the title was the same as the power, and including the people who are now beginning to understand, with the particular clarity that only comes when the ground has already shifted beneath you, that the two things are not always the same. That understanding, arriving too late to change what has already been set in motion, is where Camilla finds herself now. And what it means for the future of the crown is the question that this story has been building toward from the very beginning. What this means for the crown going forward. Some changes inside royal institutions are reversible. They happen because of specific circumstances, specific pressures, specific moments that create a temporary shift in the landscape that corrects itself once those circumstances change. The institution absorbs them, returns to its previous configuration, moves forward as though the disruption was a weather event rather than a structural one. What has happened inside the British monarchy in the past several months is not that kind of change. It is the other kind, the kind that does not reverse, the kind that becomes the new foundation on which everything subsequent is built. The kind that historians, looking back from a distance of years or decades, will identify as the moment when one chapter of an institution's life definitively closed and another definitively opened. To understand why this particular shift is permanent, you have to understand something about the three women at the center of it. Anne's relationship to the crown is the oldest and in many ways the most uncomplicated of the three. She was born into it. She did not choose it. She did not marry into it. She simply was, from the first moment of her existence, a product of it. And she has spent every year since in its service with a consistency that has never required public validation to sustain itself. That foundation gives Anne a form of institutional authority that title alone cannot confer, and that circumstances alone cannot remove. When Anne speaks inside the institution, she speaks from that foundation. And when she acted, as sources confirm, she acted in the months leading up to the current realignment. She acted from a place of absolute institutional standing that nobody inside the palace was in a position to dismiss, not even Charles. Because Charles knows that Anne's institutional judgment has a track record, that when she raises concerns, those concerns deserve serious engagement. He engaged seriously. And the result of that engagement is visible in the changed landscape of the institution today. Now consider Catherine. Catherine came from outside the institution. She learned, she adapted, she built, through consistent application of intelligence and emotional understanding, a position within the monarchy that is now among its most structurally important. Her illness changed something about how that position is perceived internally. There is a quality that institutions develop for people who have faced genuine difficulty with genuine grace, a quality of trust that goes deeper than professional respect. Catherine earned that quality in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Charles, in redirecting the institutional gravity of the monarchy toward her, is not making a sentimental decision. He is making a structural one, recognizing that the future of the institution is most secure when anchored in people whose public standing and internal credibility align completely. That is the calculation behind what Charles has done, and it has direct and permanent consequences for Camilla. Here is the reality that sources close to the situation are now describing with quiet frankness. Camilla's position going forward is one of managed relevance. That phrase requires unpacking. Managed relevance does not mean irrelevance. It does not mean removal. Camilla will attend the engagements, she will stand in the photographs, she will carry out the functions her title requires. But the internal substance of her position, the proximity to decisions, the inclusion in briefings, the gravitational pull that determines who the institution actually organizes itself around, that substance has shifted. And managed relevance in royal institutions has a direction. It does not hold steady. It moves consistently away from the center rather than toward it. The title remains, the function remains, but the weight drains away slowly through the accumulation of small decisions and small exclusions that individually mean nothing and collectively mean everything. Camilla is entering that process now. Sources describe her as aware that something has changed, navigating that awareness with the composure that has always been one of her genuine strengths, making the best of what she has, But making the best of something and reversing it are not the same thing. Anne's authority is structural and permanent. It does not weaken because a title holder objects to its application. Catherine's rising centrality is equally durable, rooted in public trust, built over 15 years, and deepened by the most personal of experiences, supported by the next generation of the monarchy in the form of William's own trajectory toward the crown. And Charles's decision to align himself with that future is the decision of a king who understands legacy, who understands that protecting his wife's position at the cost of the institution's future coherence is not a trade he can afford to make. That understanding is what makes this moment so final. When a monarch makes a structural decision of this kind, rooted not in emotion, but in institutional calculation, it does not get walked back. It becomes the foundation of the next set of decisions. Until the landscape it creates is so established that the previous landscape feels like history, that process has begun. Anne ensured it began. Charles allowed it to begin. Catherine's position is what it was always going to become. And Camilla, who waited decades for the title that was supposed to settle everything, is discovering what every person who has placed their security in a title eventually discovers. The title is not the power. The power is the trust, the standing, the institutional credibility that cannot be conferred by ceremony or protected by proximity to a king. It has to be built through decades of showing up and doing the work and earning authority that survives the shifting of circumstances. Anne built it over 50 years. Catherine has been building it for 15. The crown is reordering itself, quietly, deliberately, in the way that crowns always reorder themselves when they are serious about survival. And when the reordering is complete, it will tell a story about which women the monarchy chose to build its future around, and which woman it ultimately chose to leave behind. Anne never raised her voice. She never needed to. Catherine never demanded her place. She simply earned it. And Charles, faced with the future his institution required, made the only decision a king serious about legacy could make. The crown has spoken, quietly, permanently, and without apology. If this moved you, comment below.